Good morning. My name's Barry Byrne. I'm here to obviously present a webinar today on migrating your PBX to Skype for Business. I'm a technical consultant at Nexus Open Systems, and just before I go into the content overview for today, I was just wondering if a couple of you could tap into the chat window on the left-hand side of your screen. Just let me know, firstly, you can see the content, and secondly, whether you can hear me correctly. Okay, great. Thanks very much. So as I said, my name's Barry Byrne. I'll be taking you through the migration options from moving away from a legacy PBX to Skype for Business today. Just one thing to make you aware before we start the presentation. It is assumed to a degree that you know what Skype for Business is. You've seen some of its feature set before, and this is really focusing around the architectures that are available for you to move from your current PBX over to a unified communication solution. So moving on to the agenda for today, we're going to cover available approaches, obviously, to migrating to Skype Business, advantages and disadvantages of each cutover phase, an architecture overview of each particular strategy, and then right at the end of the session, we'll take questions from you participants. You can, of course, put them in the chat window throughout the duration of the presentation. However, I'll probably go straight the way through, and I'll pick them all up at the end. So yeah, free feel to tap them if something comes to mind, but I'll answer them towards the end of the presentation. So going into our first migration option, we have what's called the phase migration strategy. Now, this is probably the most popular that we, Nexus Open Systems, implement, and many of the vendors out in the unified communication space use. So the phase migration, it allows us to implement an architecture whereby we get complete interoperability between the two systems. So this allows you to, over a period of time, migrate from A to B in a very controlled fashion. So first of all, it helps staggering deployment costs, perhaps handset procurement, training. It also helps with logistics. If you're a particular customer that has perhaps sites spread over the UK or even internationally, we can treat each of those sites in the same way by migrating them at a very phased kind of controlled pace. One of the big plus points for this particular strategy, specifically from a business point of view, is that it mitigates risk. So by virtue of us putting the solution in a phase migration state, we can move a user from the old PBX to Skype for Business, and in the same way we can then move that user back. So for example, if you move someone over in the finance department, they weren't perhaps too comfortable with the new system, they wanted to go back to their old phone, it only takes really a few clicks of the mouse and they're back to where they were before. You can then retrain them and then move them over at a later date. It gets away from this big bang approach of we're going to replace the phone system, it's going to be done on a Sunday evening, we're going to come in Monday morning, and fingers crossed we've covered all bases. And I'll be covering cutover migration shortly. This is really what this does get around. It provides us to migrate from either ISDN or SIP. If some of you on this call have already transitioned to SIP, we can certainly reutilize that as a part of the approach. So just to kind of talk you through the diagram on the right here, very, very basic diagram in terms of how it actually works. What we do is currently your ISDN connectivity, whether that be ISDN 30 or ISDN 2E, or as I said, perhaps even SIP, will be connected into your legacy PBX as I've drawn here. So that's traditionally how it would be connected. Use BT or Virgin, so on and so forth. So what we do is we come in, we deploy Skype for Business on a virtual platform or a physical platform, whatever you may prefer, and then we implement what's called a session border controller. Now, the session border controller, denoted by the SBC abbreviation there in the center of the diagram, is a piece of hardware that allows Skype for Business to get to the outside world. So it's a piece of equipment that allows us to hook into your existing ISDN or SIP connectivity and allows that Skype system to place an outbound call or receive an inbound call from the PSTN. So what we do in this particular case is, in an out of hours period, we essentially take the ISDN cable out of a legacy PBX and we terminate that, as I've highlighted, into the SBC. We then place a PRI crossover cable, which is a cable that has a particular pin out and we then place that into the legacy PBX. Now, the benefit of us doing that, when a call comes in from the outside world, perhaps it's destined to, let's say, my DDI, it comes into our SBC there, and we have an Active Directory lookup. And that lookup will say, is Barry enabled for Skype for Business? If Active Directory returns true value, because we've gone into the Skype for Business control panel and enabled me for that service, the SBC then sends a call into the Skype for Business environment, and it then in turn calls my phone. And to get to that position, it is literally, we go into the web interface of the Skype for Business system, we enable the relevant user for what's called enterprise voice, which is the telephony aspect of the product, set their DDI, their dial plan, which enables them to call certain numbers. Are they able to dial premium rate or perhaps any national numbers? And then we're done. Let's say in my scenario there, we perform that task. I haven't quite got on with my new handset or the client. I go back into the Skype for Business control panel. I disable enterprise voice, and in this case, what then happens when I'm called is that instead of the actual telephone call being sent to the Skype for Business platform, what happens is it comes into our SBC, as denoted by the red arrow there, and it goes then down into the legacy PBX, because the Active Directory lookup that I mentioned earlier has actually failed. And when it's failed and said, no, Barry isn't enabled for Skype for Business, it then sends a call down that crossover cable, which is the second yellow part on that diagram, and into the legacy PBX. So that makes it very, very easy to transition, as I mentioned at the start of this particular slide, away from a legacy PBX in a very controlled fashion. Now, what that also enables us to do is gain interoperability between the two systems. So I'm just going to get rid of the arrows that I've just drawn there. And if we go back to the scenario where I'm enabled for Skype for Business and my calls are coming into the SBC, the lookup's been successful because I've been enabled in the control panel, and the call then goes over to the Skype for Business platform. What I can also do is, if I want to call, let's say my colleague Andy, we'll say Andy's PBX. When I dial his extension from Skype here, what happens is the call goes up to the Skype server. It says, Andy's not available for Skype. What do I do with that call? What I'll do is I'll send it over to our SBC, and we have a set of rules on the SBC that is aware of all the numbers that are in your environment. And those rules denote essentially where the call goes. So in this scenario, there will be a rule on that SBC for Andy's extension. We will say, actually, we're not going to want to send that out to the outside world because it's an internal call. We send that down to the legacy PBX, and Andy's ancient phone, let's just say it's 15 years old, it will ring, he can pick up and talk to me and use that phone in exactly the same fashion as if I was still on that phone system. So it's a very, very easy way to, as I mentioned at the start again, provide interoperability between the two systems. And that also works in the opposite direction. So if I add arrows just to the ends there, Andy can call my extension. We force the call out of the legacy PBX by using a particular technical method. The call comes up to our SBC. The SBC says Barry's enabled for Skype, sends the call then into the Skype for Business environment, and it rings my phone. So what I'm really trying to get across there is very, very straightforward for us to kind of technically implement. It's what we do for kind of 98% of our customers. Allows you to transition over time, a steady, risk-free kind of approach. Obviously, it's a great platform for testing these kind of things in depth, and it certainly fits around staffing, logistics, and also training requirements. So that's a phased migration. That's the one that I would say, out of all the things I'm going to cover with you this morning, that's one we would recommend. So I will next move on to our cutover migration. This is the one that you perhaps noticed at the start of the presentation that we do tend to shy away from slightly. This can be used, in our opinion, if you're an organization of a certain size. So a cutover migration is literally taking your ISDN connection from BT or Virgin out of a phone system on a Sunday, plugging it in. Everyone comes into work on the Monday morning and they're using the Skype system. So what this approach doesn't give you, it doesn't give you that completely risk-free approach. You can test things, as much as you like, but there may always be that one thing that kind of comes out that will work. We have to do all the testing for that solution out of hours, because we obviously can't take the ISD out of the existing PBX in the middle of the day to perform testing. So there's obviously an impact of doing that. And it obviously also means that you have to outlay a lot of capital expenditure on things like handsets kind of right from the get-go. Where in the previous method that I show you could potentially phase departments in over a period of time. That may fit with, again, budgetary constraints you may have. you would buy handsets as you move a department over, which in some of our customers' case, they've taken well over a year to move over. In a cutover migration case, you can't do that. It's one big hit. Handsets are typically deployed alongside existing handsets on the user's desk, so they will run with two handsets on the desk for a short period of time while we do the cutover. It also means, and why you have to do that, is if you do have a problem and you have to move the ISDN back to the old phone system, the user is going to need that old handset on the desk. What this is in terms of kit wise, the SBC cost in this case is lower because we need less ports of ISDN. You don't need to plug it into the legacy PBX to achieve the interoperability. And it's really heavily dependent on training and logistics. So everyone's going to have to be trained well in advance. Logistically, if you're a company that has multiple sites around the UK or even internationally, this approach can be significantly more challenging. That nice phase migration strategy to kind of take forward. So that's the cutover migration. There isn't a really huge amount to say for that. Again, it's smaller organisations. The largest we've done a cutover with was around about 150, which was for a healthcare organisation. But typically, when you get over that point, we really wouldn't recommend cutover for the reasons that I've listed. So moving on to side by side. Now this is slightly more, should I say, confusing. So I'll hopefully explain this in a clear way. This is very similar to the first phase migration option that I detailed. Side by side, as we call it, is where we can't put an SBC in between the two systems to achieve interoperability. That can be for many reasons. It could be you have a phone system that's being leased from a company, whether it be maybe Unify or BT. You don't have any access to that system. We wouldn't have any access to the system. It's a completely managed service. It may be you've already moved to a cloud PBX provider that is not a Skype solution. You want to get away from them. Again, in that case, we wouldn't have any kit to connect to in the interop scenario. So a side-by-side migration results in us kind of bouncing calls around from internal endpoints out to the PSTN and then back in again. So essentially, we're just redirecting calls. So we deploy Skype for Business down at the bottom in the normal way that we would. We implement an SBC, and often in these scenarios, customers will take the opportunity to move to SIP. That's relatively common, particularly in the last year or so. They'll have a brand new SIP trunk, and what will happen in this particular case is there will be a DDI that is purchased for everyone, a brand new DDI. I'll explain why it's needed in a moment. That will then be assigned to that user in the Skype Business control panel, and that will be their primary DDI for this migration purpose. And what we do is, going back to my scenario of Barry and Andy being on separate systems, again, we'll assume that I've moved on to the Skype Business at the bottom here, but Andy is still on the legacy PBX over on the right. Now, when Andy calls my extension in this scenario, instead of the call being routed internally, because it went to the SBC that I detailed earlier, what actually happens is we're diverting my extension using 9 for an outside line, and we divert it to the DDI I bought on the SIP trunk. Hopefully that makes sense. Now in that scenario, what happens is Andy calls me internally, a bit like diverting to the mobile phone really, diverts out the legacy PBX up to the PSTN at the top there. Because it's been diverted to my new DDI on the SIP trunk, it then comes back down into our SBC and basically down to my phone. Now that works fine. We've done that for a very large government customer, again because we didn't have access to the phone system, and the managed service provider that implemented that service wouldn't give the customer nor us access. So we wanted to provide this phased migration where actually they were too large, so 2,500 users. We can't do a cutover migration because logistically that didn't make sense. How do we get around this problem? Well, they bought new DDIs for everyone, which in their case were 0300 numbers, and then we diverted the old DDIs on the old PBX, the new DDIs on the new system. Now the downfall to this particular approach is, as some of you have probably already identified, is that if you're doing this call divert method, you're actually incurring a local call rate for an internal call. So when Andy has called my extension, it's been diverted out to the outside world, to my new DDI, to come back in again, it's paying a local call rate to call me. because it's left his ISDN and coming back through the SIP. So while it provides you lower risk, it's a phased migration. It's not something you're going to want to do over a 12-month period. You're going to want to do this probably over maximum a couple of months. Again, otherwise, because you're going to incur call rates over a longer duration. So this is quite popular, particularly in local government. Again, particularly where you've got a managed PBX. You don't have any access to it, and we won't. This is kind of how we get around this problem in the short term. It is slightly more complex, and it will involve you porting your DDIs from the old circuit onto the SIP trunk. Again, that will delay the completion process. But again, it does offer you the ability to reduce risk by diverting a number on the old PBX one at a time. So again, handset budgets, training costs, etc., can be spread over a smaller period. So that's the side-by-side migration, and that's reasonably popular. Direct SIP. So there are a few things within this presentation that I'm going to cover, really just to make you aware of what the options are. I'm not necessarily saying that we recommend all of them, and direct SIP is one of the ones that we personally don't recommend for a reason I'm just going to detail in a second. So direct SIP connection is whereby you already have an existing phone system. That phone system may well support SIP connectivity. It might be a Cisco Call Manager, for example. And instead of you buying an SBC, connecting that SBC in the same fashion that I detailed in the first slide in relation to the phase migration, what we actually do here is we sit Skype for Business behind your old phone system, and we set up a SIP trunk, this is this arrow here, between Skype and the old phone system. So again, going back to the case where Barry's been moved on to Skype for Business and I make a phone call, what's going to happen is a phone call is going to come out of the Skype for Business platform. So I'm quickly draw that on there for you. So it comes out of Skype for Business, hits the old PBX, and the old PBX says, okay, a call's come from the Skype for Business platform. What do you want to do with it? It'll obviously look at the destination number. If it's to someone on this legacy PBX, i.e. Cisco, it will go down to their phone. If it's not, it will route that out to the PSTN. Now, this is a good option for potentially piloting, depending on how much the SIP's going to cost you on the legacy PBX. Often you'll go to your existing provider and they'll say, oh yes, it supports SIP, but you need a firmware upgrade. The firmware upgrade will cost you X thousands in some cases, depending on the size of your PBX. And then you'll need to buy SIP licensing from them, which again will cost you potentially thousands to license, depending on the amount of users you've got in your environment. If it's for a small scale proof of concept, again, that's not really perhaps going to pay off. It really depends on how much you're willing to invest to kind of get to this particular solution. And the reason why we don't often implement this and don't recommend it is that, let's just say you've implemented direct SIP, everything's gone great, and the business has decided that you want to move to Skype for Business. You've invested several £1,000s in a firmware upgrade and several £1,000s in SIP licensing, and you're ready to kind of move everyone off your old Cisco phone system to your Skype platform. Well, at some point you're going to want to get rid of this legacy PBX. You don't want to take it out of the loop. You don't want to pay maintenance on it anymore, and you don't need it because everyone's moved on to the new solution. Well, in order to get rid of that, you're going to have to buy an SBC, which is one of the things that I detailed in the first slide, because the SBC is the way that Skype actually communicates with the outside world. Now, you have to buy the SBC. The SBC in its own right will cost you several £1,000s. You've already invested a lot of money getting to this direct SIP format. So from a cost point of view, we don't think this is the most effective. There are limited PBXs that you can get full support on from Microsoft. So it tends to be only the major manufacturers will be on the supported list. And also there's various different caveats, technical caveats, where transfers don't work on certain systems. It doesn't support silent suppression. Refer packets aren't supported. So you have to make sure that your current PBX realistically is reasonably new, and also that obviously it has all the applicable licensing. So we often don't recommend that system. We find that from a financial standpoint, it's better for you to implement an SBC kind of right from the get-go, really. Obviously, the cost of that can be much higher if you're a customer that has multiple different sites. But I think if you're kind of in the 1 to 3 site bracket, then this perhaps isn't financially the best way to go. Doesn't mean that you can't do it and it won't work. Of course it will, but we're kind of thinking long term. If you move away, you'd have potentially invested a lot of money for not a lot of reason. So that's direct SIP. Again, for any of you that are looking at that, we can provide some links to documentation that provides a list of supported PBXs. Okay, call via work. This is kind of one that we don't really recommend. It's superseded something called remote call control, which was a technology available in Link 2010 and 2013. And remote call control did offer quite good interoperability between your desk phone and the Link client, simply by using a piece of software in the background by the existing phone provider. That's been now depreciated in Skype for Business, and they implemented something called Call via Work as a replacement for remote call control. This really hasn't been adopted very well in this kind of Skype community, as it were, neither by ourselves or by other vendors, mainly because its limitations and mainly because it just really isn't that much of an elegant technical solution. It doesn't really work that well. So I'm going to quickly cover with you. Again, this is quite difficult to explain, so hopefully I'll be able to get this across. But in Call via Work, it's set up very similar to Direct SIP. It's a SIP trunk that's between the Skype for Business platform and the legacy PBX. And what happens here is, let's just say you're on your laptop, you've got your old PBX handset right next to it, and your laptop you decide you want to phone Direct Line. So you go to Direct Line's website, you copy their number and paste it into the Skype client, and you click call. So what happens in that case is your desktop down here at the bottom sends a signal up to the Skype for Business server, which then in turn sends it to your old PBX and says, Barry wants to call Direct Line. So it makes an outbound call to the PSTN, to Direct Line's 0800 number. When it answers, and you get the Direct Line auto attendant, my legacy handset on my desk actually starts ringing. And then when I pick the handset up, what happens is it bridges these two calls together here. These two kind of get connected. I've answered one end, Direct Line have answered the other, and the call is connected. That allows you to use your old PBX handset. There are lots of limitations to this, particularly around transferring, voicemail, holding, so on and so forth. It really isn't something that I would say you should really even look at. The reason why it's in this particular presentation is it is a way of getting from A to B in terms of moving from your PBX to Skype, and it's something you'll see if you go out and do your own research. But in real world terms, this is not something that works particularly very well. So it is an option, but it's nowhere near as good as the previous ones that I've detailed, and it just really doesn't work that well. So that's Call via Work. Because it's not that great, obviously I'm not going to dwell on it for a huge amount of time, but not something we'd advise you particularly look at. Again, you might want to maybe try it for a proof of concept, but even then you're still going to have a SIP trunk between the two PBXs, which means you're going to have to be on a certain version of firmware. There's only a finite amount of PBXs ported for this, and you're going to have SIP licensing. So looking at it overall, the negatives far outweigh the positives. Moving on to Cloud Connector Edition. Now, this is something that I did want to talk about. A lot of you probably would have seen information coming out of Microsoft over the last probably 12 months around their Office 365 voice offering or offerings. There are two that I'm going to quickly touch on now. So the first one is Cloud PBX, which I imagine pretty much everyone on this call may have heard. Now, Cloud PBX isn't quite ready for the UK market yet in terms of you actually placing your telephone calls out of that platform exclusively. You will have to buy like a minutes plan, a bit like a mobile phone contract, where you'll buy a package of minutes through Office 365, which will be, I think one of them is like 1,500 national minutes and like 500 international minutes that you pay for on a recurring basis. So it's a monthly fee on a per user basis. Now, Cloud PBX is really currently targeted at smaller customers, very small. It's extremely feature limited when you compare this against an on-premise solution. So one of the things that you can't yet do in Cloud PBX is there is currently no hunt group functionality. Now, even in our smallest customers, whether they be a Skype customer or a via IP Office customer, most people are going to want a hunt group. That's not quite there yet, and they're only kind of now just introducing an auto attendant feature whereby if you call Nexus, you get the push 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and slightly relevant option. That's only just being introduced. And there are lots of different technical factors around how Cloud PBX will work in terms of resiliency, particularly around your internet connectivity on site. If you can't reach Office 365, your phone system doesn't work because you don't have any kit on site. So that's Cloud PBX. It's not quite ready yet, and because it's not, it's reasonably feature limited. And I think perhaps outside of everyone's requirements that's currently on this core, I haven't really done a slide on that today for that reason. Cloud Connector Edition, however, is slightly more mature. It allows you to leverage your existing connectivity in your sites. So if you already have ISDN, you're in a long contract term with BT or Virgin, for example, Cloud Connector Edition allows you to reutilize that. And what Cloud Connector Edition is, Microsoft give you a bunch of virtual machines that are kind of pre-configured for you. We deploy those on site. You do have to have an SBC, as in the previous diagrams, and that allows us to integrate your ISDN connectivity or your SIP connectivity with the Cloud Connector platform. And then what happens once that's been completed is the Cloud Connector talks directly to Office 365. So Cloud Connector is like a lightweight platform. It really doesn't need a huge amount of resources to run. It can be put on a very, very small virtual environment, maybe even a standalone box. There is no kind of cost to those virtual machines. They're included in your licensing agreement as a part of Office 365. Now, moving on to that, that's where you do need to license yourself kind of appropriately. Cloud Connector and Cloud PBX are a part of the new E5 CAL that Microsoft are pushing people towards. But you can also achieve that using an E3 license and a relevant Skype for Business Online bolt-on, which again is a monthly recurring fee. Again, with Cloud PBX, this is currently quite limited, but we'll probably cater for an environment of maybe 1 to 50. So the big things currently in terms of limitations are no integration with a contact center. So you can't do any on-premise integration with any contact center solutions you might have. If you've got an existing video conferencing solution, like a Tandberg or a Polycom, you can't use those. Is where in a traditional on-premise deployment, you would be able to utilize those with relative ease. So we can't use trusted applications. They're kind of third-party products that will perhaps plug into Skype that you may be using or want to use. And a really big limiting factor is they only currently support Polycom VVX family of handsets, or USB connected devices, perhaps like headsets and so on and so forth. So your handset options are kind of slimmed down quite significantly, although it is worth noting that the VVX family is the range of handsets that we personally recommend. And the second one, which is kind of the clanger from my point of view, is that you currently can only perform blind transfers for calls. You cannot do a consult transfer. Now, a consult transfer is something that I would say 90% of our customers would do straight away. Not many people would typically blind transfer unless the call was to use that was within earshot or line of sight of someone that they knew the call was going to go to. So Cloud Connector Edition rather in itself is reasonably limited. Now all these things are being improved on, and over time, if you think of it like a set of weighing scales, on-premise and the cloud offerings will even out. But in truth, that's quite far off in terms of what the Microsoft roadmap looks like. So we're still advising customers to go down the on-premise route for the time being. So that's the Cloud Connector Edition. Again, you'll get a lot of noise and you'll hear a lot of things from Microsoft about Cloud PBX and the Cloud Connector Edition. And that's the way that the industry will eventually go. But is it ready for you right now? The answer is no. So I just wanted to cover that off because it is an option that's being pushed quite heavily by Microsoft. So that brings me to the end of the webinar. So we're in the question stage. So if you do have anything that's kind of come to mind over the last kind of half an hour, if you'd like to just pop it in the chat window there, I'll answer you directly. If there isn't anything that's come to mind and you want to jump off the call at this point, then thank you for attending. And if you do have anything in the meantime, then please let us know.